Basically, my perspective on RCEP is on a regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement, and now I start to say RCEP is from trade. So I'm looking at a trade perspective. It's not an economic perspective like that I'm going to discuss the economic impact on GNP and the per capita and etc. Mine is a trade perspective from what is going to happen on trade, and if RCEP will create more market access for firms. And especially now governments are increasingly negotiating free trade areas to create a market access for their companies. And anyone now is negotiating also because of the stalemate of the WTO free trade area agreements, and is the new way of conducting trade issues. And everyone is involved in this panoply of, or spaghetti ball, like Bhagwati used to call, of trade agreements. The point, that I would like to discuss today is about that these trade agreements are negotiated to create trade effects to be used by firms. If they're not used, is a zero-sum game. And the point is that we have many free trade area agreements that are negotiated, but they are not effectively used by firms. Now, why they are not used by firms, and this is a question that I'm going to address and explain a little bit during my presentation. And but why the FTA are not used is usually happens for South free trade areas because these free trade areas that are negotiating among developing countries, they are not as predictable as to inspire confidence on firms to invest in using these free trade area agreements. Because in using a free trade area agreement, as we're going to discuss briefly, it has a cost. And therefore, for a firm to invest in using a free trade area agreement, they need to be sure that the free trade agreement is there for a long time and it is predictable, and will bring the tariff cuts, all the benefits that the free trade area agreement is expected to grant to firms. Now, and this is the question about RCEP. Is it going to be an agreement that is going to be used by firms, or is going to be something that more provide lip service to governments that wanted to sign these free trade area agreements? And when you talk about governments, I'm talking mostly about China, because we have this kind of dialogue between RCEP and CPTPP, which is the other mega regional. CPTPP is comprehensive, progressive partnership agreement, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. It is the one that was negotiated by the Obama administration, and then was the one that the U.S. left. But still, it has been implemented by the remaining countries, and it is full in force at present. So there is this dialogue between RCEP and CPTPP. Who will be, the girl in town? What will bring the most expected benefits to the countries in Asia? Now, in order to provide a little bit of perspective, we need to do a step back and talking about a bit regional integration in Asia. As Francesco kindly mentioned, we did with a collection of studies on ASEAN integration back in 2015, which was published by Cambridge. And there, with my co-author, which still is Edmund Sim, we just examining the integration in ASEAN. And we found out that basically in ASEAN is Association of Southeast Nations, and is mostly Southeast Asia. And basically we found out that the attitude of Asian countries, especially ASEAN countries, towards the regional integration is that was a market integration, in the sense that it was led by the firms, by the private sector, and then the government was following, after, this kind of trend, rather than being a government-led in regional integration, like has been the case of European Union at the time, European Economic Community, or NAFTA, which was initiated by government, was negotiated by government, was implemented by government, sometimes even imposed on government, like we have seen on private sector, like we see the recent changes in the replacement of NAFTA, which is the USMCA, United States, Mexico, and Canada Free Trade Area, which changed many rules and was imposed on basically on private sector by the Trump administration. Now, this has been the tendency. I mean, the regional integration in Asia has not been a formal integration with formal free trade area agreements, rule-oriented, rule-based, negotiated by government. Mostly till RCEP, which I would say, I mean, broke a little bit new ground in this on this area. They preferred a kind of soft integration, differently from the European model or the North American model. And RCEP in this respect marks a difference because it's a full-fledged FTAs, long with many chapters, encompassing even WTO plus kind of commitments in certain areas. We need to be, of course, studied even more. But with respect to the past, it changed a little bit of form of regional integration. Now, if we want to compare, I mean, the two big game in town, we will see, I mean, there is a core membership, which is both member of RCEP and CPTPP. Basically, some ASEAN countries like Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam, and especially Vietnam, they are part of both agreements. And why they are part of both agreements? Mainly because they wanted to secure market access for their firms. And especially Vietnam, which in addition to RCEP and CPTPP or Japan, it has engaged in free trade agreement with the European Union. So the countries there in Asia, they are an active seeker of market access for their firms, and they are shopping around in different fora in order to get these market access. And then firms, they will have to follow up and using the agreement which is more predictable and provide more security and more advantage for the exports of their goods and services. That's a little bit I would say the reasoning behind it. Now, if we look at if we do another step back in order to understand how regional integration has been in Asia, we take an example, ASEAN, the Association of Southeastern Nations. And it started us back in 1977. And then it was progressively relaunched because, why it was relaunched? Because it was not very much successful. And it was relaunched in 1992 because they tried to follow a little bit the relaunching also of the European Union at that time. With the idea of a single market and the common market. And but at that time, the first attempt of creating a free trade area in ASEAN was affected by many exclusion lists. Many products were excluded from preferential tariff treatment. There were very difficult rules of origin to comply with. In short, it was not very successful in creating that free trade that the firms were expecting. And another effort has been relaunched by, basically there has been a refoundation of ASEAN back in 2019, recognizing that the old free trade area was not functioning effectively. So there has been, rather than having a kind of starting foundation, like the Treaty of Rome, there were, reshuffling of progressive reshuffling of the commitments towards establishing a free trade area. We're talking about a free trade area here, not a customs union. Now, in addition, there's been a kind of, I would say, dichotomy because there was in ASEAN, there has been a rather shallow integration internally when the members of ASEAN were negotiating among themselves, and the same members were, more open to take even more commitment and liberalize more trading goods when they were negotiating with other partners. Because as FTAs with what is called the dialogue partners, with South Korea, with Japan, and even with China, at times they contain provisions which are even more, I would say, predictable than the provisions that are contained in the internal free trade area in Asia. Now, the RCEP laid down the foundations on ASEAN plus dialogue with the partners like China, South Korea, and Japan. And all of the countries, all ASEAN countries, they already have trade agreements with the same partners. So it's the so-called ASEAN plus 3 dialogue partners. Now, on top of the existing free trade agreements, RCEP has been created. So that with the aim to supersede the efforts that have been already in place. That's the kind of ambition of RCEP. Now, the ASEAN, they also have an ambition by the ASEAN Charter to create a single market. So in 2005, the leaders of ASEAN, they started to negotiate what has been the ASEAN Charter 2015 to have a single market and a single production base where there is a free flow of goods, services, and investment. So these are kind of political statements that were contained, and they are contained in the ASEAN Charter, in which the ASEAN leaders, they set this ambitious goal of ASEAN integration, very much similar to what the European Union experienced by creating a single market. However, without having a custom union, which is a bit of a contradiction, technically speaking. Now, this kind of ambition was contrasted by the fact that this single market was to be created without common institutions. In a word, the Charter, which set this kind of scenario, did not provide for any supranational commission like we have in the European Union, did not provide for any instrument like a custom union or the European Court of Justice. Basically, there was not even definition of what a single production base would be. And obviously, there is no surprise in saying that the Charter of the ASEAN wishes to achieve the two objectives of single market and the single production base without providing the necessary means to achieve these objectives. Since there are no supranational or common institution which could implement these commitments that were basically statements at political level. And basically, when 2015 has been reached and there has not been any single market or any single production base, or which maybe you are not aware, what the ASEAN leaders they just reset they set to 2025 the goal of having the single market and single production base. So they have not been excusing themselves for the fact that they have been missing the deadline, and then just recasted the deadline with a number of new ambitions like enhancing rules of origin, develop procedures to deal effectively with non-tariff measures, which is affecting intra-ASEAN trade for the last decades. So that's the way in which business or regional integration has been ongoing in the region. And this, as I say, casts the doubts on the effectiveness of RCEP in becoming an effective regional integration mechanism, or we'll say, area. And then we go back to the basic. In the sense, when we look into the content of the content of RCEP, when you look at the text, what is written inside RCEP, we have 20 chapters, but encompassing much more than trading goods, trading services, public procurement, non-tariff measures, electronic commerce, everything that you want is there, more or less. But the point that when you look into the commitments, This has been quoted as a kind of shallow agreement, in the sense that commitments there are not binding and not increasing trade liberalization. And therefore, then there's been the Financial Times that I defined as shallow agreement. I'm not sure, how the Financial Times has endured the reading of hundreds of pages of RCEP, but I can say that giving a glance to what RCEP text is, which is now published in the Australian website, at least on the areas of market access goods, which I've been reading, it doesn't really go as much as it had been expected or has been trumpeted in the newspaper worldwide. Of course, all this, has to be assessed more in detail, but then let's examine, we go back to the basics. What a free trade area is, basically, and because these are the quick wins of a free trade area. What is a free trade area in the classical sense? We eliminate custom duties. It's free trade. So let's have a look at this, and let's see how RCEP is performing on this. And because there are been gains, that could be that RCEP could be generating. These gains, even the most classical ones, is the tariff cut. There is going to be progressively, not immediately, duty-free. And this kind of duty-free treatment within the RCEP area, which contains manufacturing giants like South Korea, China, and Japan, will allow that regional value chains, like I make an example, a laser is manufactured in Korea from parts originating in Japan. So the parts of a laser are exported from Japan to Korea, they are assembled in Korea, and they are exported to China as a final destination. Without RCEP, normally each transaction is taxed by a custom duty. And these custom duties, according to RCEP, they are going to disappear. And that's given the fact that the MFN rates are relatively high in the area. They are as much as high as 13.1% for South Korea and an average of 5.6%. These are preferential margins that are very much relevant for firms. And this will eventually induce firms to use RCEP because there are consistent preferential margins which could allow firms to do substantial savings on custom duties. And this, could be possibly the quick win of RCEP, even in the traditional, I would say, meaning of free trade area, which is free movement of goods within the area. However, this free trade area comes with a kind of conditionality in the sense that, and here comes to a question of rules of origin, because in order to benefit from free trade, you need to be that the product is considered as originating, that has been a certain amount of value added or certain requirements have to be fulfilled in the area. And that eventually could be possible because the area contains such a kind of manufacturing giants that it will be relatively easy to comply with rules of origin. However, rules of origin is not only the substantive part, but also comes with paperwork. It's like, you are Italian or you are British, that's fine, you are a citizen, but you also need a passport to demonstrate that you are a citizen. And here comes the issue of trade facilitation, because in order to be granted duty-free, you need to comply with administrative requirement, which for goods is a certificate of origin or an exporter declaration. Now, if you don't have this paperwork when the goods are crossing the border, duty-free will not be there. The failure to show such documentary evidence, like an exporter declaration or certificate of origin, entails the collection of duty. So the example of a laser and the savings that there could be in all this transaction will be foregone unless you have the paperwork attached. And now, and this is the utilization rate, the difference between using an agreement or not using an agreement, because firms may be unable to provide the documentary evidence of rules of origin at the point of entry, at the time of custom clearance, unless you have the certificate of origin or the exporter declaration, which is much more simpler to get because exporter declaration most of the time is a self-certification. It's like now when you embark, when you board a plane and you certify that you don't have to be. But now there are a series of administrative requirements related to compliance with rules of origin, which may impede the utilization of RCEP. And as I'm going to explain, the RCEP does not contain that much of liberalizing of texts that are liberal on the issue of administrative requirements. Here we're going to have the use that the utilization rates of the use that ASEAN member states have made in 2010, because that's the only public data that we have. And you will see at the bottom here, utilization rate are pretty low. Even for countries as big as Indonesia, here you have almost only 19% has been used of the trade preferences under ASEAN. So you're starting from a region in Asia where utilization of trade preferences is pretty low. And then you look at Malaysia, is 11%. You look at Philippines, is a bit higher, but it's 41%. So this kind of utilization rates in Asia does not really allow me to be over-optimistic on the future of RCEP. Now, the RCEP is basically, when you look at an early assessment of RCEP, in the point of, if you look at the market taxes on tariffs, as I said, the market taxes on tariffs, the RCEP contains tariff schedule for tariff phase out, which will be long to implement. In some cases, I mean, it will be over 20 years. So how effective RCEP will be in phasing out tariffs, especially when you think that the countries, they already have alternatives. So Vietnam does not need to use RCEP to export to Australia and New Zealand, not even to China, because there's already the ASEAN-China FTA. So the question arising is, what is the value added of RCEP with respect to the agreements that are already in place? Now, there is also another issue, which brings to the stance of least developed countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. And these countries, they're LDCs, they're mostly exporting agricultural produce to China, South Korea. Of course, I mean, they're also producing garments, but they are not going to export the garments to China because China is the main competitor for garments. So where are the gains for these countries if the tariff on farms, as it appears, they have not been effectively reduced in RCEP? So this is a kind of questions which, I mean, comes to, when you look at the text, and you compare it and you start to think about it, these are the kind of the questions that come to my mind and also not only to my mind. Now, and the region is really affected by non-tariff measures. When I'm speaking with Cambodians, government officials, I was saying, which they have strong ties with China, they say to me, we are desperate because we want to export agricultural products to China, but it's impossible to get it there. It's not a question of tariffs, it's a question of SPS. And how effective RCEP will be in dealing with non-tariff measures like SPS is hard to say at the time being, for the time being. Now, recently, the focus has been on the issue of rules of origin, because on this area, there is potential for RCEP to provide a common set of rules of origin to all the countries of areas. Because RCEP, geographically speaking, will supersede, because it will be bigger than the panoply, the spaghetti ball of FTAs that are existing. So RCEP will be much bigger than the existing bilateral FTAs, and therefore will be easier to comply with rules of origin. Because if I'm based in Vietnam, I can use intermediates in China, I can use intermediates in Japan, assemble in Vietnam, and export to South Korea. That will be the gain for RCEP, because we'll be, and they get duty free. That will be, I mean, the kind of triangle, of a winning triangle, I would say. And this, I mean, also will strengthen regional value chains and foster regional integration. However, when you go into the nitty-gritty, when you go into the detail of RCEP, you will see that the trade facilitation principle, the technicalities, the day-to-day practices, you know, at the border, you will see that RCEP is not as liberal, for instance, as CPTPP, where, I mean, under the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, mostly is self-declaration, so the exporter can certify himself, which the goods is originating. While, I mean, at the beginning in RCEP, the exporter needs to go to customs with a piece of paper, get it stamped, and all this is a cost. So that will work as a kind of disincentive for firms to using RCEP unless there are large gains to be had in complying with this less trade facilitating administrative requirement. Now, and then if you look at the quality, because I also have a legal background, if you look at the quality of the drafting of the agreement, it provides a lot of discretionality to the implementation authority, to customs. And this again creates uncertainty in business. There is nothing more the business aids that uncertainty, because they have to do business plans. Business plans are calculated on money, on savings from custom duties in this case. If these savings from custom duty free there are unpredictable, they may choose not to use the agreements at all, because otherwise the accounting of the firm is always uncertain from the customs guy having a good day or a bad day at the border. So then we come to the conclusion is for the value of RCEP, it comes to the question, it is a paper tiger or not a brick in the wall? I mean, the agreement is 2 weeks old, so it's very much too early to say if it's going to be one or another. I explained in my presentation that I think that the historical and political background of regional integration in the area does not augur well, in the sense that ASEAN, in the experience of ASEAN, is not one of the most successful regional integration. Many countries, especially the smarter one, they are in multiple tracks, like Vietnam. Vietnam, they have an agreement with the European Union, they have an agreement with Japan, they are part of the CPTPP, they are part of RCEP. So in case, I mean, one agreement fails, they have another one, I mean, that the firms can use. Obviously, the agreement is young, so there is time to read more in the content of the agreement to see, but most importantly, the moment of truth will come when the RCEP has to be first ratified and then implemented by member states. How it will be implemented in the day-to-day will be a kind of litmus test for seeing if the RCEP and the free trade that RCEP is expected to bring will be effectively used by firms. And also there is another factor which is linked to RCEP, is the fact that the new administration in the US may join TPP. I mean, Joe Biden, I mean, has not said anything yet, I mean, on what the US will do, but for sure there will be a change on trade policy in the US. So if the US will be rejoining the TPP, that could be a litmus text on RCEP. Either, because an extra effort will be done for implementing RCEP, or RCEP will be progressively become less used than the new rising star, which will be the CPTPP. But that we can predict now. We just are still studying, but these are the options that are in front of us at the moment. And I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm sorry for the beginning that I was a little bit difficult to get my presentation, but that is the message that I wanted to share with you at this point in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for your comprehensive, analytical, and I would add surgical dissection of RCEP. I personally learned a lot from your presentation, and I suppose the same applies to the whole workshop. Now, we have about 15 minutes left. It's rather late in the afternoon. I would like to see whether there are participants who would like to ask questions to Stefano. For the time being, I do not see any hands raised. I'll give you another 30 seconds. Well, while we wait for some questions, I would like to share with you my preliminary thoughts. Of course, I noted your lukewarm attitude towards RCEP, but as you know, opinions vary widely as to the impact of this agreement. There have been studies, especially by Brookings Institution, where some major benefits are pointed out. Of course, you started with the premise you don't want to go into the econometric aspects of the discussion, but probably I was wondering whether you recognize that for some countries like Japan and Korea, that before RCEP were not tied in any FTA with China, these countries will have important gains from trade, especially on trade with China. You mentioned the other important aspect of the possible gains, which is the harmonization and the simplification of the rules of origin. That I don't have to dwell very much on that. The third point that has been also raised earlier this afternoon by Professor Muso is the possibility that with this kind of agreement, some, especially Southeast Asian countries, can better be integrated into the Belt and Road Initiative of China. At the same time, as you know, some observers have raised the possibility of risks of trade diversion, in the sense that with this agreement can hurt those countries that for the time being are out of the agreement. India, for instance, that for several reasons, that probably you can explain to us why India has not been associated to the agreement so far, and the United States. And on the United States, I share with you your hope that the US will join RCEP eventually, but how reasonable is the expectation that an agreement which is so shallow, as you said, like RCEP, with no rules on state-owned enterprises, on labor and environmental standards, with all these weaknesses, how can the new administration be attracted to it. I stop here, and while I check whether there are new questions, would you please answer to mine?
Yeah. I think that first of all, I'm aware that there have been some studies already which attributes to RCEP additional growth in the size of 170 billion. And these studies, I think you are much better equipped than myself to comment upon it, which are based on gravity model. There are studies. I don't really. I think that there will be. There are. I don't really have to comment on this since but I don't really. I don't really see. That kind of growth. Due to RCEP. If there will be a growth, that will be most likely because of China investment, which will, or according to the Belt and Road Initiative, rather than by the gains to be had from the agreement itself. That is what I think. Concerning the United States, what I was saying is that the United States will never join RCEP because RCEP basically is a creature of China, and rather than anything else. And if the U.S., they will do something that will revive the CPTPP, they will enter into the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. That has been a creature of the Obama administration. That eventually could be envisaged. So there will be two poles, one gravitating around RCEP and another one gravitating around the CPTPP. With countries like Vietnam staying on the middle and try to benefit the most of both of them, the best of the two worlds. But I think that now, if I believe that the future of RCEP will very much depend, at least the quick gains, on what has been saying in the sense, from the eventual tariff cuts and the fact that the RCEP will create a common pool, a common platform or rules of origin. And that's, I agree with you, that this could create a trade diversion. So that regional value chains, when we are talking about regional value chains, within the fact of regional value chains, there will be a strong incentive to source integrate inputs within the region rather than outside the region. That's for sure. If RCEP is going to work, if the tariff cuts contained in RCEP are going to work effectively, that there is a great potential for diversion. The issue of India, and then India may eventually suffer, but India has left RCEP negotiation by its own will. Basically, they, at a certain point in time, the Modi government decided to withdraw from RCEP by its own initiative because we know India's stance. They don't have appetite for trade liberalization, especially when China is in the picture as well. We're talking about geopolitical interest, and they're not interested to enter into a game where China could be the leader, and they perceive that they don't stand to gain from it, and that's why one of the reasons why the Modi administration made India to withdraw from RCEP.
Thank you, Stefano. I don't see any possible questions from the floor. Donatella, if you allow us to go on for another 5 minutes.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, then I'll try to exploit my friend who is encyclopedia on these issues. Now, my further question is, can I engage you a little bit on futurology? Because I would like to exploit to the maximum your vantage point of having been associated with so many free trade agreements, including the latest free trade area for Africa. Now, as you well know, these FTAs are living animals. In the sense, they are created and then they develop, they become adolescent, and this has happened to ASEAN, of course, to the European Union, and so on and so forth. How do you see further steps in the area of RCEP? Being a little bit optimistic, how do you see RCEP in 5 years' time? What are the areas in which we can detect some improvements, both in terms of broader coverage of countries and deepening of the issues covered by the agreement?
I think they will. The first, I would say, litmus test will come with ratification. How long will it take to ratify RCEP? I mean, to make it effective, because the agreement now is signed by government, but has to go through parliament. That's how these passages they will be effective. Mostly as Asian countries, they are autocratic societies, so it should be relatively a speedy process. What the real challenge, I would say, I mean, will be on implementation, and where, I mean, especially in the area where the quick wins should be there. As you say, the environmental issues, government procurement, trade in agricultural goods, they're really shallow commitment there. So where, I mean, the RCEP, I mean, should really flex the muscle is about trade in manufactured goods. Also take into account that the preferential margin are high. That's where, I mean, the quick wins could be. But it depends on an effective management of the traditional issues of rules of origin, you know, on how effective trade facilitating instruments they will put at the border. I think in a few years from now, you will see that some updating will be done in RCEP in order to facilitate, you know, these procedures in order to be more effective. How this will be translated into reality, one big, I would say, change would be also to improve transparency. The RCEP has been negotiation has been one of the best kept secret. We didn't know. We knew very much. We didn't know very much what was in RCEP till the last minute. Even myself, that I was very close with some government officials, it was really difficult to get, even informally, texts about RCEP. And the negotiations they were conducted, they were very close. They didn't request any assistance, so it was very much a rather not very much transparent exercise. I hope that in the future, RCEP implementation and also further negotiation, because you got an agreement and then you're still tinkering on the agreement in order to make it better, as you said. And I really hope that one big step would be to monitor the implementation of RCEP and with the utilization rate. The utilization rates are customs data, which should be made public. And if this data is made public, it may trigger governments to change for reforms to make the agreements more effective. But of course, some governments in Asia, they're not particularly sympathetic of transparency. And we see, I mean, I show a slide, which is the only one that I got, about utilization rate in ASEAN, which is very low. But the ASEAN Secretariat has not made any effort to publish every year what is the utilization rate of ASEAN. Now, you have data about utilization rate of free trade area agreements by the United States, by the European Union, I mean, they are accessible, and also Japan, because that is a public good, which allows government and firms to assess and monitor how the free trade agreement that they have been negotiated is affecting in delivering results. Now, if this is done in RCEP, that would be a sign, a real sign that something is changing. But I doubt, that will be made. But we'll see. Maybe we see a surprise. A few years ago, to have such a complicated, long negotiation bringing to RCEP would have been very difficult to get, and now it's there. So we will see. On the African continental free trade area, since you touched briefly, well, the issue are a bit the same, in the sense that the first part of agreement is going to be made effective next year. However, there are uncertainties related to the extent of trade liberalization, meaning the tariff cuts and the rules of origin. So, these kind of free trade area agreements among developing regions, even China is not developing, there is a lot of political emphasis, but then there is, when it comes to reality, on tariff cuts, which is the elementary, the first, elementary basic of free trade, they really have difficulty in getting realistic, to do real trade liberalization. Free trade, no customs duties. In the year 2020 should be rather easy to achieve it, and is still a challenge in Africa and to a certain extent also in Asia.
Thank you very much,